Right. Welcome to this webinar on navigating the impact of financial crime compliance costs in APAC, being organized jointly by Asian Bankers Association and LexisNexis Risk Solutions. For those of you that I haven't met earlier, either online or offline, I'm Shirish Pahak and I head Fintelekt, which is the region's foremost specialized training provider on AML CFT, working closely with regulators and reporting entities in their capacity building efforts. Many thanks to my good friend and colleague, Mig Moreno at the Asian Bankers Association for inviting me to moderate the webinar today on behalf of ABA, and I'm truly delighted and honored to be here. As you all know, ABA has been at the forefront of providing industry knowledge to its membership through knowledge sharing sessions, both in person and virtual. And this is one such forum where you, the members of ABA, as well as the other non-members attending today, can take advantage of these efforts being taken by the Asian Bankers Association. We would also like to congratulate LexisNexis Risk Solutions for coming on board as the newest associate member of the ABA. And the ABA is glad to count on such prestigious corporations to bring further value to all its bank members. Furthermore, I would also like to take this opportunity for those of you who are not yet ABA members to consider encouraging your bank to join the membership. And may I also remind all participants today that this year the ABA annual conference will be held in Taipei on the 18th and 19th of November 2024. It's going to be a two-day event full of important sessions on subjects that are affecting Asian banks. You will, of course, be sent more detailed information in future emails from the ABA. Now, today I'm joined at this webinar by two industry stalwarts. My good friend Julia Chin, principal at JFourth Solutions, and incidentally also an empaneled trainer with Fintelekt, and Ramanathan Sivabalan, director of market planning, APAC, financial crime compliance and payments at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. Julia and Ram, welcome to the webinar. The APAC total cost of compliance study has been run by LexisNexis Risk Solutions for the last 7 years. And the focus of this study has been to figure out how reporting entities such as yourselves are streamlining internal operations and enhancing efficiency in financial crime compliance. Now, this time study, which has been conducted by Forrester Consulting on behalf of LexisNexis, has brought out some interesting trends like the advent of new risk typologies, challenges posed by a dynamic and volatile geopolitical environment, and of course, the rising expectations from customers and how ensuring customer satisfaction is now emerging as a key ask for compliance officers. The study this year has revealed that financial crime compliance costs have actually increased for 98% of financial institutions in the last year, which is significant. We all know that banks are seeking ways to reduce cost and at the same time comply with regulations to the optimum extent possible. But of course, that's easier said than done. So here's the agenda for today. We will start with a presentation from Ram, in which he will share with us the key insights that can be derived from the report. This will be for about 15 to 20 minutes. After that, I will discuss a few key issues on the impact of these increasing costs and other aspects of the report with Ram and Julia for around half an hour. And then we will open up to the audience for Q&A. So while the presentation and panel discussion is on, please post your questions in the Q&A box, and I will take up as many of them as possible towards the end of the webinar. With that, I welcome you all again to the webinar today, and may I now request Ram to deliver his presentation. Ram, all yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ram. I joined LexisNexis Risk Solutions around a year and a half ago. I'm based here in Singapore while I run the market planning function for APAC. As a market planner, my job is to study regulations and the requirements of my customer and ensure that both of them have a good union. And one of the prime tools that I use to do my job is this study that Shirish referred to. All right, thank you so much. The way I have structured this presentation is in 3 parts. First of all, to give you a quick background of the study. I think Shirish has done a great job introducing it. Maybe I'll just fill in a little bit. Then take a deep dive into the findings themselves. What does the data tell us? And what are we hearing? and finally conclude with some recommendations. The Q&A bit, we can do it later, as Shirish mentioned at the end of this discussion. So the total cost of financial crime compliance, or true cost of financial crime compliance study, is part of a global initiative by LexisNexis Risk Solutions. This is conducted every year, as Shirish mentioned, for the last 7. And last year, this was commissioned, we commissioned Forrester Consulting to do this across the world. Over 1,181 decision makers in financial crime, as well as IT and management, were contacted. And in Asia, we picked 5 countries from China, Australia, Singapore, India, and Japan, of which 271 respondents were surveyed. There is a reason why we picked these 5 nations, primarily because they each represent a kind of a bellwether for the area that they are. So South Asia, Southeast Asia, Japan, Australia, and obviously China. The areas of responsibilities of these survey people are across all FCC areas, be it AML, KYC, sanctions, transaction monitoring, etc. But we also focused on the non-action owners, such as risk assessment, IT, technology, etc., so that we have a holistic understanding of the topic of financial crime compliance. We also decided to create an equal mix between banks, traditional investment or securities, or non-banks, insurance companies, asset management, and payment services. With that background out of the way, let's go quickly into what the number is. So according to Forrester, the estimate for total cost of compliance here in APAC is $45 billion, and that's a huge number. And more than 50% of that roughly comes from China. That's not a doubt, given the complexity and the maturity of the market, closely followed by Japan. So what does this really tell us? Well, it's a financial number, but there are a lot of lessons to be learned from there. When you look at the global number, which is around 200 billion, APAC is already clocking roughly 25% of the global spends on financial crime. And when we ask the respondents, what are the kind of components that are contributing to it, or what are the cost drivers, we had some very similar answers. So as Shirish already mentioned, 98% of the institutions have reported increase between 1 to 20% of costs in compliance in the last year alone. And there are 3 major reasons for it. Firstly, increasing regulatory pressure, the worsening geopolitical environment with wars and civil strifes everywhere, especially in the digital domain. Now, when you look at the breakdown of the costs itself, we asked the respondents, what are your biggest cost elements? And without a surprise, labor topped the charts. In fact, labor has been topping this survey for the last 7 years. What is interesting to note is how quickly technology costs are catching up with labor. So more than 32% of the respondents said that their costs have increased in technology as compared to 41 for labor. But technology doesn't work just in isolation. There's a lot of IT infrastructure is also needed. So if you combine the system cost plus the infra cost, now one can say that the costs of technology are far surpassing that of labor as well. But there's a reason why we have to invest in IT, and we'll come to that in the next slides. But before we go there, how does this trend mirror across the world? That was APAC numbers. Now you can see the global numbers. Globally, labor is always ranked as the highest cost increase category, except North America. In North America, technology takes that cake. And there's a good reason why. North America, as you know, has one of the most toughest and most complicated financial crime compliance requirements in the world. And we have found that as the other parts of the world catch up to that same level of standards, technology costs are expected to keep going up in the days ahead. We then also ask them, even within the categories, where do you think that the actual increase is happening? So when you start looking at FTE, full-time employees, or part-time salaries, we found out that more than 75% of the respondents said, yeah, they have to start paying more. And that's not a surprise. As the job of financial crime compliance keeps becoming complex, you are wanting to have more and more skilled resources to do so. Not only just hiring them, but also training them. So if you see the third bar, it says labor resource cost related to training. So not only we have to pay higher salaries to hire the right people, keep them motivated, but also spend equal amount of money training and upskilling them. But if you realize, there is also two very interesting data points, which is technology costs related to systems and technology costs related to the actual software itself. And even though they may look different, but they are quite similar. So overall, you see that the key contributor to rising compliance costs is a holistic increase across both technology as well as people, but now increasingly also outsourcing. And we'll speak about that sometime later. When you look at this cost increases across the 5 regions in Asia, which we started off, you will see that it's more or less the same, especially related to outsourcing, infra, technology. It's roughly the same. And that's good reason, because technology typically is similarly priced. But when it comes to labor, this survey has actually thrown up some interesting results. In countries where you would expect a lot of plenty of talent and cost should be lesser, we are seeing increased cost. But countries like Australia, for instance, which has a very limited manpower pool, we saw that the cost increase has not that been high. So it tells you one more part, which is that developing nations have actually to face a higher cost burden as far as peoples are concerned, even though the salaries may be not the same, but the demand for talent is much higher. So what are these cost drivers? And we'll get into it. And how does it matter to all of us? One of the we started on that. We spoke about how the increasing regulatory pressures and so on and so forth are dominating costs. But before we wanted to go there, we wanted to actually get to the bottom of it, saying, hey, why is the cost going up? So without a surprise, increasing regulations, regulatory expectations was your primary driver. But very interestingly, two other facts came out. The first one relates to how banks are reinventing themselves in a post-crisis world. They are moving from a traditional banking model to a digital banking model. So incorporating new ways of distribution or new way of onboarding customers through eKYC means there is additional cost. And finally, because of regulatory requirements, you now need to make almost near real-time reporting. So that has meant that there is an increased spend on technology, automation, and data tools as well. When you start looking at all of these moving parts, you want to know that where are compliance officers being focused? So we asked them a very open question, saying, hey, to what extent is your department going to prioritize these following objectives? Pick your choice. And without a surprise, the first thing that they picked was to improve customer experience. The second one they picked was enriching payment data for improved processing. And then comes cutting compliance costs. See, so that's something very interesting. Banks and financial institutions are prioritizing customer experience above costs. And there's good reason for that. And I'll come to that in the later slides. And why is customer experience so important? Well, there's good reason, primarily from a revenue perspective. A happy customer means that there is more business, and more business means the stakeholders are all satisfied. In fact, McKinsey did a study where customer experience was found to increase revenue growth by more than 25% if the organization focused just on customer service as one of the primary areas. And we often hear, businesses complain and crib saying that compliance officers make the job of doing business so difficult. And the challenge for compliance officers is how to run a more efficient compliance program by delivering customer experience in a much better fashion. So the other question then we asked is, if these are your priority areas, what are your pain points? And there were a lot of answers. And if you see the slide on the right, you can see compliance officers almost rank all of them as the same problem area. So we decided to take a step back and say, hey, there has to be some consistent story here. And the story is the following. FIs in APAC across the 5 regions face almost similar challenges. The first one, very interesting, because as Asia rapidly digitalizes, real-time payments have become a must. So customer expectations around real-time payments are top of the wish list for any business. But existing compliance models sometimes do not facilitate that. You need to do enhanced due diligence at some point of time, or at some point of time, there may be a sanction hit that you may have to investigate. So real-time payments do get hindered by the current compliance models. The second one is complex sanctions. Sanctions originally were simple listing of names and entities, but more and more we are seeing export controls replace sanctions. That makes even more challenging for compliance departments to, fulfill their responsibilities. So what we are seeing is banks across APAC are increasingly rushing to automate it and in some cases outsource it. Finally, the exploding alert numbers. And there are reasons for that. The regulatory, expectations around performing screening on a real-time basis or periodic basis has been increasing across APAC. That results in increased work, and that work translates to alert numbers. But also, we shouldn't forget that in the last 3 years, we have seen an explosion on sanctions. Since the invasion in Russia, we have seen more than 7,500 names being added in just a matter of a year. And when you think about it, there are 230 business days. That's more than 100 or 200 a day. And that means the kind of alerts will automatically go up. We then turn the microscope a little bit and we ask them, what are the key changes in the risk typologies? And if you see on the right hand side, there are two colors there. We have asked for risk increase between 11 to 20% and the ones which go beyond 20%. And without a surprise, what we have seen consistently over the last 4 years is that financial crime involving digital payments has been topping the chart. But this year, what is interesting is that AI has started to challenge financial crime involving digital payments. So crypto payment, digital payments, that continues. But financial crime involving the use of AI, either due to authentication or for that matter, falsification of documents, we have been seeing a steady increase of complaints by compliance officers saying that, hey, these are my top risks. But at the same time, age-old risks such as corruption and bribery within the supply chain, which leads to trade-based money laundering, continues to be also steady. So in short, in APAC, one can say that while banks have to still grapple with age-old risks, some of the other risks have been mitigated to a great extent, like KYC has been largely sought for individuals. But traditional risks such as corruption, money mules continue to haunt us. And at the same time, we have to now contend with the new types of financial crime risks, which are involving digital, crypto, and AI. When you have such a big challenging risk environment, screening is one of the best solutions to fix that because screening hits multiple risks at the same time. When you just don't screen for, say, sanctions, you also screen for onboard, or for that matter, you also use it for risk profiling. So we asked the compliance community, what are your topmost challenges on screening? Now, we wanted to do it slightly differently because of the people on the call today. Some of you are representing big banks, some of you represent medium-sized financial institutions, and some of you are just in startup phase or bespoke operations. So what we found was very interesting is that regulatory reporting was consistently reported as a top challenge. And that's good reason for that. Because the whole predicate reason why financial crime controls were mandated was that regulators and law enforcement authorities have a good handle on the risks and they are intimated before. In the mid FCC spend category, we saw that the challenge on sanction screening emerge as a significant concern. Maybe it is availability of data, maybe the fact that they have to contend with a far number of correspondents than larger banks is. That may be some of the reasons. But also very interesting to note, for lower category banks or higher category banks, identification of sanctioned entities and politically exposed person was reported as very significant. This is very interesting. That means the problem of identification of sanctions is not just a problem for small banks. It's equally a big problem for larger banks as well. Finally, when we look at some of the exclusive problems of larger banks, KYC onboarding through electronic KYC is ranked as one of the most important things. KYC for account onboarding that's how we call it. So what is the future now? Where are we all headed towards? So we asked the same compliance officers, what are the 3 or 4 things that you are planning to change over the next 3 to 5 years? So and the response was actually pretty split in half. So more than 58% of them said that they would want to change the way they do KYC. And like we said, or we saw earlier, most of them are due to the fact that now digital onboarding is prevalent, digital customer engagement is prevalent, but also the fact that KYC itself has gone through a sea change. Thanks to electronic registries, manual processes have kind of disappeared, but still remain in some of the corporate onboards, for instance. The second thing that banks also told us is their focus on data quality, internal data quality. So it either reflects as, well, they want to develop internal communication tools where data can be used, and we'll see in the next slide how banks are using it. But more importantly, how they better can collaborate. And the traditional AML transaction monitoring, which continues to evolve over periods of time, will continue to be there. But majorly, we see changes coming. Banks are wanting to invest on data as well as KYC. Similarly, we ask them, what are the benefits from changing your models? If your compliance model is going to change, the top response we got was they want improved collaboration between compliance and payments or operations teams. And that is for good measure. We saw how changing customer expectations is about going towards real-time payments. Customers want to, KYC only once. They don't want to do re-KYC again. So they want basic better collaboration between all the other parts of the bank so that we are able to speak one language and not disturb customer and give him a great experience. Similarly, the second benefit from all the changes is through how operational efficiencies can be unlocked for compliance team. We all know that, we are not getting enough headcounts or resources to staff our position. It's always a challenge. Management always asks, why do you need? How do you need? But at the same time, also to make products that benefit or integrate well with the organization structures also are equally important. So we are seeing that the changes in compliance program are triggered by the fact that the business model is evolving, but at the same time, the push towards efficiency means that things have to start rationalizing. We spoke about data, right? So one of the things that data is so critical is because right now you must have heard stories about bank data breaches, privacy breaches, and there is significant public reputation at risk if banks do not take care of technology or their program, which unfortunately exposes customer information. But at the same time, to improve operational efficiency, you need to ensure that the data is consumable by everybody. So we asked them, hey, what do you mean by enhanced data management? And 2-3 things were very interesting. Majority of compliance officers believe that data can be also used for other business purposes. There is nothing called as compliance data, to be really honest. It's customer data, it's transactional data, and there can be multiple uses of it. So that's your first part. The second part is, more importantly, use the customer information to benefit the customer. If you know the customer's track record through a sophisticated transaction monitoring platform or even a basic account review mechanism, either case, you have a better handle on who your customer are, what they are up to, and how better we can sell them or serve them. But also interesting is that same data can be used for better risk management. If a customer has consistent track records, you do not have any false positive alerts or etc., you can definitely bank with that customer much better. You can give them better credit terms, you can give them pricing which is favorable, and thus increase customer satisfaction and the customer experience. So data management helps not just in the compliance program, but also in the wider business. And that's something that compliance officers should definitely champion in his or her organization. Before I conclude, we wanted to make some recommendations. And the idea of this recommendation is to help compliance officers just focus on maybe 1 or 2 or 3. What are the top 3 areas that you would really want to take away after this presentation? But more importantly, in the discussions, we will talk about it even more. But the idea being that these recommendations can help you design a compliance program which is future fit, and how we can, by balancing customer experience. So the first recommendation is how do we balance compliance effectiveness with better customer experience. More compliance doesn't mean good compliance. Good compliance means a balanced approach of asking the right information, keeping that information available, and thus allowing your customer to have a seamless experience. So if you have a balance between them, you would definitely reduce false positives. You will be letting a lot of legitimate transactions through and thus not inconvenience your customer. The second focus should definitely be on making something future fit and pragmatic. We use that word pragmatic, FCC approach. Now, we agreed from the study that technology helps get you a very efficient FCC program, but at the same time, it may not be pragmatic. You cannot throw an IT solution every time. Sometimes you need eyeballs to do the job. That's still the reason why there is a huge involvement of human power in FCC, and computers will definitely not remove all of it. So to balance man, machine, and process together in a way that by leveraging IT is the right way to go. More importantly, also collaboration with other teams within the bank. Compliance is not just compliance's responsibility. Compliance is everyone's responsibility. And so long as compliance officers can provide that kind of data or analysis that can help their business colleagues or operational colleagues to make their lives easy, definitely there is a greater chance of collaboration and partnership between them. And finally, you should not shy away from asking for help from FCC partners who can provide these kind of solutions or ideas because they have seen it in other places in the world. For me, the right advice at the right time is worth more than any program or any automation can just simply deliver. Finally, the need to embrace new technologies. It's not a surprise criminals are actually using these technologies much better than banks because they are small operations. They learn fast. They have people who have that kind of negative mindset, but they are leveraging AI, cryptocurrencies, and digital channels to perpetrate their crimes. And increasingly so, they have been also teaching the conventional people to use it. So we are seeing now scenarios where trade-based money laundering or corruption risks are using or leveraging some of these digital tools. Now, how do we beat them? Now, we can beat them with their own tools. Investing in systems which have ability to have advanced AI, ML compliance models, also using privacy preserving techniques, because technologies are so far so good so long as they are ensuring your data is kept safe. Data is now one of the most stolen assets in banks. No, it's no longer bank robberies are no longer done through physical entry of criminals. They are after your data actually. And more importantly, using advanced analytics to make the right FCC model can help you optimize where you're putting your people, where you're focusing your technology, and more importantly, how do you do regulatory reporting. So these are the 3 recommendations we had to make at the end of the study. If you want to read more of the study, I'll leave this for 30 seconds. You can scan the QR code. You can download the report, which I just presented to you over the last 10, 15 minutes. And you can read that. And we are happy to address any questions. Over to you, Shirish.
Right, thanks, Ram, for that fantastic presentation. Before you exit the slides, we have one question to do with slide 21. So I thought maybe we can take that before we get into our panel discussion. So this is a question by Yip Chin, who's a former regulator from Malaysia, who says FCC in future should not be limited to slide 21. Do you think we should look into the skill set of compliance officers themselves and the way they operate? So maybe you can take a answer this question, and maybe I'll request Julia as well to add her thoughts to it, Ram, after you're done answering it.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much for your question. I think it's a very relevant question, and I think regulators like you across the world are actually grappling with this. When we began our career as compliance officers, we were coached by law schools and we were sent into the field. Later on, we realized that that's where our education ended, and we begin our school. So we were actually schooled back in the banks, and we realized that technology starts playing such a big important role. These questions that we asked the compliance officers was more predicate towards what are the areas that they want to change. But definitely, skill set development by virtual integration. I'm seeing regulators now insisting on having compliance officers, not necessarily from a legal function, but from the business moving in. And that's basically from a point of view that if you are representing the business, you understand how the mindset of the customer works. And that person can have a better communication back to the business saying these are the right risks to focus on. But definitely very good point, sir. I'll let Julia complement or supplement my answer.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Chin Yap's question is very relevant, especially in our current age where compliance is no longer one function that is sitting in one corner of the building, but actually having extensive and holistic knowledge about the end-to-end operations so that we are able to more effectively support the business. It's not just going to be ticking the boxes.
All right, let's have a quick discussion about various aspects of the report now. Let me start with Julia because we'll let Ram catch his breath and take some rest after he's finished that presentation. Julia, Ram mentioned in his presentation, that there's a huge increase in labor costs, resource costs, as well as technology costs, right? Now, according to you, what strategies can or should organizations adopt to mitigate some of these expenses, right? You've been a principal officer, a money laundering reporting officer, and you also consult with various other organizations. So, what is your opinion and what do you see people doing about it?
I think first of all is to identify what we need because much that we need a lot of technology. One is actually to understand what exactly the technology that we need and what we have in our organizations. And as Ram mentioned also about data and about how compliance is seeing the reshaping the operations is so relevant, and I'm glad to see the survey result is very aligned to what I personally feel as well, and especially in the sense of how to mitigate these expenses is actually the need to be cross-functional, and compliance not being operating in silo being one. And also a lot of times the challenges arise because of poor data and especially during in implementation. Many organizations have failed in the implementation or even the digital transformation. It's because we fail to understand our own internal processes and our data and the skill set that we have. So before we start doing any project implementation or transformation, it's important for us to understand the skill set that we have, the data quality that we have. Is there a need for us to enrich the data? And is there a need for us to look at the structure of the data governance, provenance of data? There are a lot of things that, as also shown in the report, data is becoming a very critical part of it. I've really seen some projects fail because there was a failure for us to understand the quality of data and the sheer amount of effort being taken to enrich and improve on the quality before even the migration from one system to another. And therefore, having the need to relook at our processes, our target operating model to ensure that all these fit into place before we kick the ball, before we kickstart the entire project.
Right. Thanks, Julia. Okay, Ram. In the study, as you mentioned, there has been an emergence of new risk typologies, right? And it's taken a big uptake. Now, you also deal with organizations around APAC. How are they dealing with these new trends?
Thank you for your question, Shirish. It is the sad reality of the day. Fraudsters, especially digital fraudsters, do not discriminate between nations. They just follow the connection, as we say. And the connection today is in everybody's hand, is your smartphone. And what we are seeing is with proliferation of social media, these kind of scamsters have a leg up because there is only as much supervision that bank can do on their customers, but they really cannot monitor the customer social media and the links that they click. So there's a lot of education that is required to the customers. We are seeing that across APAC, regulators are taking initiatives by engaging the industry associations, but also the general public through public service announcements or conducting workshops to educate customers on safe banking practices. But that's just the tip of the iceberg because education or prevention is your first line of defense, but you need more. Now, the second line of defense that we are seeing best in class banks do is how they are integrating their customer operations with compliance operations. So we always used to say in banks that a better knowledge of your customer is needed, not just to know the customer and serve him well, but also to protect him or her as equally. So we are seeing integration of data, as Julia mentioned, how critical it is from customer operations to IT, and leveraging traditional compliance tools such as screening to do effective monitoring of transactions. That's your so integration, better collaboration, and using digital tools to fight the fraudsters. The third aspect is also about how we are communicating with one another. So if you have seen in Singapore, the Cosmic database has been a game changer. It has come as a big repository of information that banks can collaborate with each other and share. That allows banks to, bypass the kind of how can I say self-created legal restrictions by collaborating with each other through a secure and safe manner. There are other ways to do so by leveraging tools which create kind of data consortiums. So creation of data consortium on a private-public partnership basis are also are the other tools that leading banks in APAC have learned. But as I said at the start, it all starts by education, educating your customers and also your internal stakeholders about being aware of these kind of risk typologies. Continuous education is a must. And at the same time, refining your compliance tools by making it more efficient, more effective, by knowledge sharing with each other and leveraging what we have. One simple example I can give you in my experience on solving some of the risks that we saw in the early days of the digital adoption was about where the customer is transacting from. Now, as a traditional compliance officer, I could last go back to the KYC that I did maybe a year back or maybe 6 months in a half-yearly review. But one of the things that our IT colleagues suggested is that we can find out the IP address from where they logged in. This was much before VPNs were proliferating. Now that's another challenge. But at least we could now know, triangulate that, yeah, this person is doing transactions from that particular geography. We did avert a few incidents thanks to that kind of knowledge. So periodic exchange of information of tools and tricks between departments, I think goes a long way in mitigating financial crime just between the traditional definitions.
Right. Thanks, Ram. Okay, Julia, back to you. Now in the presentation, Ram also spoke about, in the survey, there was coverage on the balance between, the need for stringent compliance measures, and at the same time, one needs to maintain a positive customer experience, right? So how can this balance? First of all, what is the balance, and how can that be achieved? What are your thoughts on that?
Maybe I can start with sharing a personal or two personal experiences when it comes to payment transfers. One was when I was in Dubai, I made a transfer from UAE to Malaysia, remittance. And sorry, that's a bit of background noise. And then the other time was when I was making a remittance from Malaysia to Singapore. And in both times, my funds actually got stuck for 3 weeks, and then it got returned back to the originating bank, which was my personal account, to my other personal account in different countries. And I lost bank charges, and I lost on foreign exchange. And so you can see the amount of the sheer agony of not being able to do the transaction, and why was I even flagged, and why was my fund even being held and then returned back. And so these are some of the challenges that we face in the world of banking, and therefore it turns people away from banking and move into fintech. And then we don't want to talk about fintech at the moment, but you can see the amount of challenges, and it now causes people to look for alternative ways to make those payments. And I think I must have lost at least $500 from those FX costs, as well as bank charges, and not being able to make the transfers eventually as well. So I think when it comes to talking about stringent compliance measure, I know that as Ram mentioned, there are a lot of concern right now, especially with sanction and with transaction screening and monitoring. One I feel needs to be done is that let's relook at how often we do system calibration and how we train our people to make sure, and I know that also from transaction monitoring perspective is that possibly, I think if we talk about a very effective one, possibly 5% out of the amount of alerts do become suspicious transaction reporting to authorities. And so therefore, having it is important to calibrate. It's important for us to train our teams to be able to do the calibration and understand the systems. And the other thing that I feel is important as well is that our compliance team, I'm speaking as an experienced compliance officer, is that we need to train our internal compliance team to know how to articulate the risk to the business line and work with them together to mitigate those risks, and not just sit back and say, oh, you cannot do this, without actually identifying what exactly the risks are. And why do they not know how to identify the risks or articulate what the risks are? Is because they do not know the products and the businesses well enough. So yeah, so to recap on that is, first we need to train our team members on products and businesses. We need to train our team members about the system so that they know how the system behaves, and we know how to calibrate the system properly. Back to you, Shirish.
Thanks, Julia. So, Ram, what do you feel are some of the key challenges that banks, reporting entities face when they're actually implementing screening operations, right? Compliance screening operations, and how is it different for APAC? And given these challenges, what is your recommendation to them as to how they should overcome them?
Thank you for your question, Shirish. Screening is the lifeblood of a compliance program, and the original requirements when they were announced were quite basic. But as rest of Asia catches up with the global standards, we are seeing regulators increasingly demand more and more. Previously, it was only restricted to banks, but after the latest FATF announcements, DFNBPs, including dealers in precious metals or money changers, or lawyers, for instance, they now have to screen. And when we see screening, and that's the reason why if you saw the survey, we actually categorize them into small, medium, and large, because we realize that there are certain challenges that all of them face. Now, the fundamental aspect of screening starts, as Julia mentioned, data, right? So how do we catch customer data, either through onboard or during transactions, and how often do you screen? So that's where the first requirements start popping in. So to identify your screening obligation is your first step, and right estimating it. The second one is to get appropriate data or screening lists through a certified provider or a known provider to ensure that the lists remain updated, are timely refreshed, but more importantly, are accurate. As in, there are certain editorial standards followed in preparing of this data, because the last thing you would need is to have a true hit and report to realize that it isn't. So that's your second part, getting the right amount, right quality of data. The third is the appropriate screening solution, and that totally depends on the use case. For organizations which deal with a lot more cross-border payments than domestic payments, you would definitely need a screening platform that can go through Swift messages or any other mode of intergovernmental transfers, so that the ability to screen is not just restricted on one particular field, but all the fields. So you're also wanting to screen the beneficiary bank. You're also wanting to say, for instance, check the goods that are being described in the Swift message, so on and so forth. So the complexity of the screening has to be identified. And lastly, but not the least, is how accurate the filter is. You saw in the survey, organizations have counted screening alert as one of the prime reasons for staffing up. Most of the organizations right now dedicated more than 30 to 40% of the resources only towards staffing those people. So having technology that can reduce false positives, bring out the real true hits that need to be investigated, and allowing you to do a proper case management becomes important. So in summary, APAC is going through a sea change as far as screening is concerned. So I strongly recommend all the compliance officers or professionals on this call to take take a step back and review their screening universe. Look at how, as Julia mentioned, look at how the bank's products and services works or the payment services are working. Then define what is the kind of universe for which you need the data. So identify a right data provider who can give you timely and reliable updates. Thirdly, choose a solution that uses a little bit of technology, especially AI ML, for instance, to reduce your burden of false alerts. And finally, most importantly, for any screening is a requirement for tuning. One of the critical challenges that we see in APAC is people buy technology and forget about it. Unfortunately, just like a car, I keep saying this, you buy a car, but you use it, great, but you also need to send it to garage from time to time. So that's how it is. So you have to do that. Please do tune. So we have regulators like the BSP in Philippines who have come up with very specific regulations around it. The Singaporean regulator has also announced that kind of a intention in the MAS guidelines, even though they don't made it mandatory. But the expectation is to tune and manage your system. So these are the 4 success criteria.
Yeah,
Right.
actually, I wanted to add something because Ram triggered me when it comes to AI generated or AI powered tools. I think there are a lot of challenges when it comes to people saying that, oh, I mean, no fault of those people who are selling the tools, but there is this tendency of saying, okay, we have generative AI powered tools that you can reduce your amount of workload. It doesn't happen until we have the right data that is used for machine learning to teach the machine, and we have the right people to teach the machines, and also we have the right people who can do the calibration. So that was the trigger for me.
Brilliant. I think that's a very brilliant point. And I already mentioned that in my recommendation, right? Pragmatic. Just because it's AI doesn't mean it's good. And that's the reason why labor is still so important. And that's why, ABA is doing such a big job of educating its members, right? Because education and, a good person can make the system greater. The other thing on AI, and this is one area we have been grappling because we support the world's largest banks, but also the most recent startups, is that one of the key expectations from regulators is explainability. Now, in sanctions, the threshold for explainability is 0 to nil. You cannot explain to the regulator saying, oh, I had set up an AI and it made the decision for me. The AI can be an enabler. It cannot be the decision maker because this is a key regulatory obligation we are running. Similarly, on KYC, oh, I missed out this alert because the AI said it was all okay. The demographics are all right. The behavior is all right. AI can help, it cannot decide. So our product philosophy has always been that's why to get the AI to support the compliance officer. Small steps like writing a case summary after an investigation is complete. AI can be used for these kind of, I'll not say non-essential, but a task which doesn't need that kind of skill set. So very good point, Julia. Back to Shirish.
Thanks, Ram. So while we're on the topic of AI, we actually have a question from a person in the audience. I think you've partly probably answered it, but maybe you want to reiterate. So it says, is there any further breakdown of the labor costs highlighted in the report? We have seen significant efficiencies with AI reducing transaction monitoring false positives. Is there any focus on compliance reporting and analysis?
Definitely, I do not. I will definitely go back to the report and come back to you specifically. But what we are seeing in the market right now is that AI has started making baby steps. Like I mentioned, in this field of sanctions, the usage is restricted primarily as an enabler, not as a decision maker. In transaction monitoring, the risk thresholds are much lesser, Shirish. So what happens is, is AML at the end of the day is to be aware of certain money laundering typologies. And then the way we score it is a combination of multiple scenarios. You can definitely train AI ML to model to quickly dispose of alerts. So hence the use case is open, and there is a wide variety of AI ML solutions, primarily from transaction monitoring. But when it comes down to sanction screening, unfortunately, the regulatory envelope doesn't give you that logic allowance. While you can use the AI ML to help identify, categorize transactions that look like false positives, and then you eyeball it and you dispose it, that's great. But I don't see in the next 2 to 3 years regulators allowing full-fledged AI ML on the topic of sanction screening. Transaction monitoring, definitely so. KYC to a great extent, especially for identifying fake documents or inconsistent information, etc. So you will see evolution there. As far as labor costs are concerned and linkage to AI, I'll come back to you directly.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ram, for answering that question. Julia, back to you. I mean, I know that you are a big proponent of collaboration. So this question for you is on collaboration. How do you think collaboration between reporting entities, regulators, as well as technology providers? How can this collaboration help reduce compliance costs? How can it improve overall effectiveness actually in combating financial crime? Because finally that is the goal. We've got to become more effective. So any thoughts on collaboration?
Yes, I do a lot of work on fraud and scam, and I think, it's worthwhile mentioning here is that the bad guys are entrepreneurs as well, and they are accountants and lawyers in their teams, and there are now a lot of organized crime activities happening. And so, to us, it's actually, even for compliance officers, I constantly feel like I'm running behind technology, and I believe it will be the same with regulators as well. And so it is important for us to be able to pool our resources together, work together as a team, whether or not you're a big organization or a big bank, or you are a fintech, because a lot of the fintechs are making use of the banking infrastructure in order, or the ecosystem in order to access the global financial system. So all of us actually working together. We build technology together, we pool resources, we pool knowledge. That's probably the only way that we can get around it. And on top of that, what I see to be very effective is Ram also mentioned about consumer education, and that would be an area I believe the regulators are working very hard on as well. And with all this, we basically are not going to be able to see everything in silos anymore. And in the tech firm, I think that the other thing is what I would call responsible innovation. And with technologies working together with regulators and with financial institutions is how we are going to be able to protect our ecosystem and our consumers and our loved ones from, especially right now, very deep in my heart is fraud and scam. Back to you, Shirish.
Thanks, Julia. Okay, we have 5 minutes left till the end of the webinar. So, and we do have a lot of questions, but let me combine one question from an audience with the last question that I wanted to ask you, actually, Ram. So before I ask you that question, Ram, there is one question which says that, you mentioned a while ago that compliance is too costly. What would you recommend to small banks to cope with digital solutions, considering the capital that, small banks typically have? And if you can also tell us, how organizations, especially in APAC, are actually leveraging data analytics, predictive modeling to enhance their FCC capabilities.
Thank you for your question, Shirish. Firstly, quickly on small banks, and that's not just true for small banks anymore, because more and more financial services firms are not getting banking licenses. They are coming up as fintechs or payment techs, and that's a very conscious choice. Regulators do not want banks to proliferate. They want a handful of banks to be around, and hence the new age companies who are fin-enabled, as you call, or the smaller banks have the same challenge. Now, the three challenges they have is, like, obviously they do not have the budgets to make high purchase complex systems. They do definitely lack the right manpower. So Julia mentioned to you that having your staff trained on technology is also critical, because otherwise you can buy a Ferrari and you can't use it. There's no point on that. And the last point being maintenance becomes critical. So having a service provider who can give all three becomes very critical, not just the system, but also the advice to use it. So what we are seeing is there are now products in the market which obviously use the cloud to a great extent, because that reduces the cost of infrastructure. So that's straight away 20% of your cost goes off. It gives you more access to collaborative technologies such as AI, ML, because it's all hosted centrally. You can leverage that to reduce your human power, human man capital investment. And finally, it enables for easier reporting. So that's another area, apart from just alert disposal or alert management, is regulated reporting, because it's all digital. The program, the risk signals are all integrated together. So your KYC program, your transaction monitoring, your sanction screening is all integrated through one solution. So there are options available in the market. That's how small banks are managing. And the last question on analytics, it's very timely. In fact, regulators are now saying that knowing your customers and knowing the transactions they do is most effective way of transaction or anti-money laundering. How do we do that? Well, Julia mentioned a couple of solutions, right? On frauds and scams, especially, we are seeing banks use technology where they are able to find out where transactions are originating. I gave you the example of an IP address, but that IP address now is also able to link to the IP address of your phone. So we have been able to see success cases where we have triangulated this information and exposed scam mules, say in Malaysia, or we have been able to penetrate fraud networks in other parts of Southeast Asia. So that's one. But most importantly, running your payment information through a predictive model, which can identify through a network analysis the kind of patterns or corridors where we see high risk fund flow happening. That's another area where analytics have been successfully deployed. Now, analytics as a concept sounds complex. I understand that. But I think the first thing organizations should do is build a risk appetite that, yes, we want to go there. The second thing they do is start preparing data. And to help prepare that data is where they start collaborating between compliance, business, and payments team, technology team. And lastly, then go to the right kind of service provider who have these kind of analytical solutions that can ingest the data. And there are, depending on the complexity, there are solutions available in the market. Not just LexisNexis, but there are plenty of brilliant firms out there who can do that. But I think it starts with setting up your risk appetite.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ram. Okay, before we end the webinar, Julia, any final thoughts? Since you're the only lady in the room, it's good to let the lady have the last word.
Well, I'll say this is that there have been a lot of questions to me whether AI is going to take over their jobs, and I'm going to say no, because we still need humans to be able to run those AI to teach the machines. And so to me, it's not so much about having humans that will be there to tick the boxes, but we need to upskill our teams to be able to do the higher value amount of work, or the higher value work, I would say. Say, for example, in the past, we will have bodies being thrown at ticking the boxes to remove the, or rather to close off the first layer of transaction monitoring alerts. It's still happening, but I think with the support of AI, we would be able to do a lot more analysis and more quality analysis. And that's where I feel upskilling our team members and empowering them to think outside the box is critical.
Fantastic. Thanks, Julia. Thanks, Ram, for being on this webinar today. Once again, Mick, thanks for inviting me to moderate, and thanks to AB and LexisNexis for organizing this webinar.